Alright guys, we're going to solve some quadratic equations this time. How do I know when I'm doing a quadratic equation? You're looking for an x squared term. Anything that has an x squared term, that's got to be the biggest exponent, so you can't have any x cubes or x to the fourth. So x squared, and that's the biggest exponent in the problem. Alright, what do you want to do first? Alright, before you can solve any quadratic equation, you need it to be equal to 0. Okay, so if there's something that's like on both sides of the equation, you need to move everything over to one side of the equation so it equals 0. All right, and then what are my different solving options? All right, I'm going to kind of give you an order here that you want to go through. So number one, you want to try factoring. This is the easiest method because you break it into those two parentheses and you just set them equal to 0 and solve. Okay, but that doesn't work on every problem. Some problems just aren't factorable. So if that happens to you, then option number 2 and 3, these are kind of a personal preference. I'm going to give you some ideas of like when one might be easier than the other one, but really you could do either one of these on every problem. All right, one of them is completing the square. Okay, and we'll go through an example of this, just kind of refresh your memory about how that works, and then the other one's a quadratic formula. All right, you might remember that I sang a little song to help you remember what this is. If you don't remember what that song was, you can look it up on YouTube. Just put in quadratic formula song, and there's a ton of videos on it. All right, and then number 4, we can use our calculator. I mainly just use this to check my work because the calculator will give you a decimal approximation of the answer, which is not always what we want. Okay, we want exact answers, which involve square roots and fractions, things like that the calculator doesn't always cooperate with as well. Okay, but it is a great way to check your work when you're done with one of the other methods. Alright, so this first quadratic equation we've got here, it's equal to 0 already, so we're good to go. We see that x squared, that clues us in of what type it is. Alright, so we're going to try factoring first. Whenever there's a number in front, this is the one where you want to multiply first number and last number, so that's negative 12. And we want to see, can we come up with any numbers that will multiply to negative 12 and add to negative 11? Alright, you hopefully will come up with 1 and negative 12. Alright, that'll multiply to what we want, and it adds to negative 11. Okay, now we take our first term, 4x, and we write it twice. Now you notice I'm not writing the squared, because when we factor, we're breaking it down into x times x. So I'm dropping the squared off in this step. Alright, then I'm put 1 as one of my denominators and negative 12 as the other one. Okay, this one doesn't reduce, so that one's ready to go into the parentheses, 4x plus 1. Alright, this one over here does reduce, so we need to reduce it. They're both divisible by 4, so the 4 cancels out, and the 12 divided by 4 becomes a 3. So that's x minus 3. And now that's ready to go into the parentheses. Alright, and then to finish off solving the quadratic, we just set each one of these equal to 0. And solve for x. So this one we have to subtract 1 and divide by 4. So we get negative 1/4. And this one we need to add 3. So x equals 3. Alright, and most quadratics you're going to get 2 solutions. Alright, there are very rare cases where you only get 1 solution, but most of the time it's 2. Alright, so take a look over here at this one. Now you notice this one, it is a quadratic, x squared right there, but it's not equal to 0. So the first step, get it equal to 0. That's going to be achieved by getting this 6x and moving it to the other side of the equation. Add 6x. So that's x squared plus 6x minus 11 equals 0. Alright, so first we're going to try factoring like we did in the last one. There's no number in front this time, so we don't need to multiply. It's just negative 11. We want to figure out what numbers multiply to get negative 11 and add to get 6. Well, the only options that multiply to negative 11 are 1 and negative 11, or negative 1 and positive 11. Neither one of those add up to 6. So this is one of the types that is not factorable. So factoring is not an option. Alright, this one is going to be easiest to do by completing the square. The reason for that is there's no number in front of x squared, and the middle number is an even number. Those are kind of the two things you want to look for to complete the square. If neither of those things holds, then quadratic formula is going to be the way to go. We'll take a look at one of those next. Alright, so completing the square is the thing where we have the blanks. So you put x squared plus 6x, and then you put in a plus blank. All right, we're going to put a number there that's going to make this a perfect square. Then you actually want to move that 11 over to the other side of the equal sign. So we're going to add 11. So that's positive 11, and then you have to put a plus blank over here, because anytime you add something to one side of the equation, you have to add it to the other side as well. All right, and then to complete the square, you take that middle number, 6, you divide it by 2. That's 3, and then you square that, and you get 9. 9 goes in your blank, and here as well. Okay, we made this a perfect square, so this is going to factor, much like this factored into these two things. This is going to factor into two things that are the same, so it's going to be one factor squared, and it's going to be x plus 3. Okay, 3 times 3 is 9, 3 plus 3 is 6. Okay, you can get that number from this part of the completing the square step. It's always going to be this number that you've squared. All right, and then that equals whatever these two added together are. 11 plus 9 is 20. To finish this out, get x by itself, we need to get rid of that squared, so we're going to square root. Okay, anytime you square root, you have to put a plus or minus in front. So it's going to be x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of 20. Then you can subtract 3 from both sides, and you get x equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 20. Alright, so I said that you could check your work in the calculator, so I'm going to show you that. Reminder of just how to do these in the calculator. You can solve these in using the calculator's polynomial tools. So if you go to Menu and Algebra and Polynomial Tools and find roots, that's what we're doing when we solve. We're finding the roots. So degree 2, that's just saying it's a quadratic, it's squared. We want real roots, so you hit OK. And then you just need to type in all the coefficients. So we had 1 was our first coefficient, and then 6, and then negative 11. Hit OK. This will pop out onto your screen, and you hit Enter. All right, now you see they gave it to us in decimal form. That's what I was talking about, how I don't like the calculator as much there. But we can type in our answer, so negative 3 plus the square root of 20 and negative 3 minus the square root of 20, and those should equal the same decimals. So let's make sure that works. All right, there's the 1.47 right there. And if we do negative 3 minus, and there's the negative 7.4. So good way to check your work and make sure you're getting the right answers there. All right, one more type here. All right, so again, we have the number in front. So we're going to try factoring first. So we're going to multiply 3 times negative 7. So that's negative 21. And we got to figure out numbers that multiply to negative 21. So you got 1 and negative 21. You've got 3 and negative 7. And we have to see, do any of these add up to 2? All right, nope and no. And even if we switch the negative to over here, it's still not going to work. So factoring doesn't work. But this one, we don't want to do completing the square because this number in front is a hindrance to doing that. Also, while the number in the middle is even, to take care of this number in front, it's just going to make it much harder. You're going to have to deal with a lot of fractions. So this one's going to be the easiest to do in the quadratic formula. So here is your quadratic formula. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Alright, so this is our a, the first one, the b is the middle one, and the c is the last one. And that negative goes with it, so it's negative 7 for c. So that's x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 7 all over 2 times 3. Alright, we'll use our calculator here to calculate this part under the square root. You don't want to square root it because that's going to give you one of those weird decimals that we don't want. So just put the part under the square root. So that's 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times negative 7. Alright, so that's 88. So this is x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 88 over 6. Now, you can simplify a radical. This isn't a perfect square, so that's why we didn't want to put it in the calculator, but we can break it down and simplify it, and hopefully we'll be able to reduce this a little bit. So 8, I know that's 8 times 11. 8 breaks down into 4 times 2, and 4 breaks into 2 times 2. And remember, when you're simplifying radicals, you're looking for pairs. So we're going to take a pair of 2's right there, and that's going to get to come outside. So that's going to leave us with x equals -2 plus or minus. The 2 comes outside, and then whatever's left over, which is 11 times 2, that stays inside. So that's 22 over 6. And then we can actually reduce this because all the numbers outside the square root are divisible by 2. So just divide them all by 2. You get -1 plus or minus. This is going to become a 1, but we don't have to write it. So just the square root of 22 is good there. And then 6 divided by 2 is 3. And that's your final answer there. All right, let's check and make sure that this works. So we're going to go back through and do our polynomial tools. All right, so we had 3, we had 2, and -7. All right, again, the bad decimals, that's what we didn't want. So let's type in our answer, -1 plus the square root of 22. All right, make sure to arrow out. And then if you want to divide that whole thing by 3, put it in parentheses. So parentheses, and then divided by 3. All right, there's the 1.23 we were looking for. All right, and then I'm just going to arrow up and copy this so I don't have to type it all again, because all we have to change is that positive, that plus to a negative. So delete that, change it to a minus, and enter, and there's our -1.89.